put our poetry on the internet, and everybody in this kind of writing group, and through putting my poetry out there on the internet, I've had the pleasure of learning that my poems are both fake and gay. So it's been nice. So, hey bastards.
Thumbs down this fucker.
I'm really glad to see all of you guys here. I actually will start with a poem called Skin that I usually don't read because Eric and Luke make fun of it so much now. They've heard it so many times. But everybody that saw my car after I got into this car accident is here in some way. So this poem is called Skin, and it's about a car accident that Creley and I barely survived. Where is Creley? Oh, you're hiding behind your camera.
I saved you.
Alright. Skin. I left a shred of skin on the inside of my wrecked car. The windshield scraping off the frill of my knuckle like a chef's knife separating a piece of dough. This tatter of knuckle skin hung there like frayed gauze, the limp, discarded flag of a ghost ship. It lost its color while I watched, changing from watercolor pink into a kind of mummified gray, severed from the blood and heat of my hand, uprooted and dying with the slow regularity of a puddle growing stagnant. The Jetta had rolled 4 times in the rain, gaining its tires and losing them again, like a wounded animal who is not quite yet dead. Although I saw the ground rushing up from above, although a rock wedged into the open door and yanked a handful of hair from my skull, I had not been hurt until I brushed the inside of that windshield. Now, fluttering from the limp sheet of safety glass that droops inward above the steering column, is this veteran's patch of skin. Skin from the same knuckle that broke Brian Haster's nose with the sharp, sudden motion of someone splitting firewood. The same knuckle that has brushed the insides of parted thighs and sometimes moved deeper, sending incomplete and mysterious messages from beneath skirts and pant legs. This same wrinkled thimbleful of finger that moves along the gentle lunar incline of my girlfriend's face in the dark. This overlooked piece of myself is hanging from a shard of glass the size of a carpenter's nail, finishing the parched business of dying. And I'm regretful. This knuckle that has brushed away tears has been cured like leather and paint chips and motor oil. Now it will be replaced by something smoother, by the pink skin of new growth that cannot entirely be trusted. Skin that I will have to build from scratch, that may not turn out as well. And somewhere else, on the side of the freeway, is that one clump of my hair, maybe dyed black, covered in transmission fluid and tar, wrapped around rocks and tied into knots by the turbulence of passing cars. I hope that a few strands have been buffeted to other places, carried by the contrails of big rigs up into the Cajon Pass, to rest with the ashes of my cousin, wrapped around an axle and brought up north, where a blue jay will put it into her nest, tucked inside the latticework of the Golden Gate Bridge. These silly dreams are important, because the skin, it's not going anywhere. It will be towed away with the car frame once I clean out my possessions. A secret bit of humanity, tucked into the crushed hulk such places make of cars, hidden away inside the wreck we make of the world. Very much sex or vaginas in my poem, but since we are close to Halloween, I'm gonna go with a monster theme, and I surprisingly, like the nerd I am, have a lot of poems with ghosts and shit. So we'll go through some of those. The first one is about my rabbits, and they might not sound like monsters, but they're little bastards. And Lloyd, I have a William Blake epigraph in here, so fuck you. This is Le Pon, Le Pon, Le Pon. That's French for rabbit. The cut worm forgives the plow, William Blake. The rabbits are marauding again, loose all through the house. This is not a good idea. They're cursed, or possessed, or ill. Wherever they go, they shit. It is best not to look too closely at their leavings. The pellets might take the shapes of hanged men, of gods clothed in flesh, hanging limp and broken from the crossbeams. I don't turn my head anymore to glance at unusual movement, because a rabbit, deep in their voodoo chants, will hover feet from the ground. Somehow smug, self-satisfied, his tiny buck teeth glinting like arrowheads. Rabbits engaged in debate turn nihilistic, Nietzschean. It's easy to walk away, to think you've won the argument, only to find yourself hours later in the tiny Italian restaurant in the village, glaring disgusted at the teenagers. Do feed the rabbit, please. Go ahead. It will not be satisfied. Shannon took that for a carnival, so I really appreciate that, because I didn't think anyone would ever watch that. That's a weird poem. Alright, so much like I'm a nerd, Carly's also a nerd. She's a high school science teacher. And so I learned all about geology and like the geological history of this region. And up in Azusa Canyon, right, there's a tunnel to nowhere, where like they started digging this tunnel all the way through the mountain so that people could run away. In case there was like a nuclear explosion or something. I wasn't, you know, it's Azusa, so who knows what they're up to. So, this is my explanation, because I'm a hardcore nerd. The tunnel to nowhere, Azusa Canyon. Their shovels broke on the rock. Inside the cave, the breath fogged, if there was enough light. And the cold gripped like iron hands in the dark. Breezes sighed up from the guts of the earth, and the workers slumped over, dead. Choked on nothing, their hair falling across their foreheads like sleeping children, tools still inside the loose circle of their fingers. They quit, finally, the only sound the toccata of loose pebbles, the crossbeams groaning in the dark. In the darks of the cave, the cobalt people are still waiting. Just past the next few feet of rock, their hands clasped, their skin shimmering with faint oil rainbows in the low blue light of the underworld. Their arms full of the strange underground flowers, thin as rice paper. They missed the twangs of picks against the ground, the low percussion of demolition charges. They're always hungry, and they wanted to swallow ravenous mouthfuls of our thick and cloying air. They wanted to finally feel the daylight on their cold, flinty skin, to see the color of each other's eyes. The sun is not at all like they imagine it will be. It's lighter than a spider web. It's everywhere at once, ghostly as the song. A murmur. And this is a poem about a ghost. There was a ghost at the train station this morning. An old black man, sitting cross-legged on the bench, reading a newspaper in the early morning darkness. He flickered under the sodium arc lights, mist caught in the pale orange flash. When I got closer, he was gone. There was just the lonely scream of the approaching engine, the clang of the crossing arms as they glittered and slammed into place. Later, I looked for him in the crowd at Union Station. He might be lounging in one of the wooden booths, head lolled back, staring at the woodcuts and the vaulted ceiling, squinting his eyes against the oncoming dawn. He isn't there. In the bathroom, the graffiti reads, "Try to forget," in black crayon. I don't look in the stalls for feet. I don't check the mirror. But still, I try not to forget. How much time have I taken? How many? 8? What the fuck? Okay. I must read slowly.
You can edit that out.
Yeah, I will. Alright. I didn't do it in the mic, so it's fine. Alright. This is called Souls in Purgatory. And this also has an epigraph, Lloyd. As we passed the time thus pleasantly, I saw death go by along yonder corridor. She was with a friend of yours. Mike Carey, God Save the Queen. And that's from a comic book, I'm just saying.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Moments doled out like a morphine drip, of course, in coffee spoons. In the heat, we twist and fray like ribbons tied around tree trunks. Trace that plastic circle. Trace it again. Sweaty sleep, knuckles so dry they bleed, the rasping lung, the slight hitch in my breathing as the sun rises. Walk home, and you will smell the sprinklers hanging floral perfume of water. At home, the blue television, a blade of light beneath the door. The first few notes in that old forgetting song. Alright, well, I'm just going to go longer, because, you know, I'm don't last. You guys are stuck here.
Hey, we're having fun.
This better have the word opalescent in it.
It's got some opalescence. I like went through before you guys got here, and I was like, no opalescence. These guys are merciless. I went to school with these three guys, with Shannon and with Brandon from my undergrad, and they're all mean, terrible people.
The neon opalescence
Yeah,
of your
I
soul.
didn't have any neon. I didn't do that. So this is also because of Carly. It's called Why I Will Not Donate My Body to Science. And a little bit of this might be me making shit up, but just go with it. In her classroom, in the science lab, my girlfriend tells me, not looking up, that the school is raising money for a new skeleton. A human skeleton, held together with wires. These cost thousands of dollars, tens of thousands. The chalky weight of them, the craftsmanship of their proteins, laid across one another like heady jewelry, the salvage of a life. I lift up the arm of the old skeleton, the one that needs replacement. I let it fall. This arm, it could be 30 people, the radius and the ulna from a retired cop, the cracked knuckle of a gymnast. We do too much damage to our bodies to use any one skeleton. I myself have too many calcium stitches across my ribs, battered joints in my hands, jagged edges to my vertebrae, the ones that cannot seem to bear the dumb weight of my skull. I could not be in anyone's skeleton. I'm too small. My bones, sometimes they feel hollow, as if every day they are sublimating, evaporating in the accumulated glare of my heartbeats, withering from the heat of caging me, of pushing and expanding. What I feel inside when I read Eliot or hear a coyote howling in the distance. I would not like to be that weak link, the jaw that hangs too loose, the spine that will not stay straight, the hand that will not hold a fist. There in the classroom, holding the bones of 30 people in that hand, in my hand, I think it would be dishonest to lend them my bones, to fool them with the seeming solidity of me. At any moment, I might drift away, might scatter into crenellated pieces, the gymnast knuckle, the librarian's cheek. They would have nothing left to hold them, their ghost frowning at the pieces on the floor. Final proof of my unreliability. Alright. Apparently I brought too many poems. So, we're going to give you guys a 2-poem warning. My father in the morning at the kitchen counter as he struggles to live through yet another day. No, nobody told my dad about this. My father is a broken gunslinger, his hands bunched into knots that came from working too hard and fast as a soldier, as a hired gun, half a world away from here. In the white of his left eye, there's a tiny comet of blood, a shattered capillary that hovers forever just beyond the field of broken blue that is his iris. This tiny blood star blazes back in the hollow light of early morning, while he draws himself up to his full height and grips the edge of the countertop, perhaps to keep himself upright beneath the weight of it all. His face is filled with lines that look to be age, but are actually the passages and furrows that dreams will carve as they exit the body. His crow's feet are the fine webs of glass freshly broken by an invading fist. They're the marks of disinheritance. The spiraling torn edge across his left cheek is where his stepbrother, who will never love him, told him so while wearing his class ring. The wrinkles at the downturned edges of his mouth are the legacy of stock market crashes that will take his life savings while the World Trade Center is still burning. The permanent darkness in the hollows around his eyes are tattoos of affairs and addictions, a litany of guilt drawn into bruised leavings of insomnia. Leaning against that countertop, waiting for the coffee, my father is somewhere else. He's in the place that bursts blood vessels and carves lines into wooden faces. He's the last soldier alive on a beach, a reservist in the South Pacific, the sole survivor ankle-deep in scarlet water. He's in both places at once, big hands splayed across the white tile, like crippled animals at uneasy rest. Each sigh makes his chest visible between the lapels of his cotton bathrobe. It is a Rosetta Stone for the translation of pain, the signs of a weight that is still bearing him down. Where am I time-wise now?
You're about to hit 15.
Alright, good. Let's see. Alright, so I used to work for years at a teen center, and It actually turned out to be a really hard job in a way that you wouldn't expect. And I have a long poem that I close with now. That's kind of my love letter to this area and my high school experience and what it's like kind of growing up in the Inland Empire. So this is that poem, and it's in 3 parts. It's called The Inland Empire. In the dark cab over Fair Lane, I say how all summer long we broke windows for fun. The pavement still sighing with midnight heat, witch glow of the dashboard lights in her hair. I whispered how the street races seem to last forever. The screaming tires as mad and lonely as freight trains hissing and roaring through the night between the empty lots and shops, shooting toward the grim Los Angeles skyline. The buildings like the slats in some great fence, the barrier we were not fast enough to cross. She was leaning backward in her seat, head cocked, the firm white line of her neck plunging down her cotton dress, the suggestion of her stomach flat under the material, cotton catching muted moonlight. She dangled one hand outside, the cherry of her cigarette, a spark hovering inches from her thin fingers, a firefly suspended in space, a still pendulum of light and fire that grew bright and dim, codified certainties, the Morse code of a whispered scripture that would never be written down. In the car, I told her how Joe Aguilera had pulled saplings from the ground, his eyes glassy and predatory, his muscles shredding, his palms bleeding, how, on fire with drugs, he'd walked down the island in the middle of the street and destroyed everything he could touch, howling machine laughter through grinding teeth, how the next morning he woke up screaming, some of his muscles worked off the bone by his own strength. Kaylee just leaned back in her seat, eyes out the window, hands restless at the top of her steering wheel, black nails fluttering toward midnight. I tell her how my mother used to read to me, her thin arms wrapped around me to reach the pages, the slow progression of her fingers tracing the words, me in her lap, the orange arc sodiums, tracing the paper between the blinds, because the lights were so low in the bedroom, her breath stirring the back of my neck. Good night, moon. Good night, clock. Good night, owl. I say the words too. I sing them under my breath. I feel her heartbeat fluttering beneath her gardenia skin, a blood-filled metronome ticking against my shoulder. 2. On cloudless nights like these, the lights visible from the foothills, the darkness of the farms breaking on the never-ending warehouses, then against the greater blackness of our home, I can hear Kaylee's bones humming in her grave. One long note twining over and over, sighing between cemetery willows until it spills into my sleep, and I step out onto the porch and watch the smoke swirl up into the watery air, evaporating before it is escaped the halo of the street lamps. Here, the stars sometimes form a fractured, half-blind cosmology. I do not know their names. I have not tried to learn them. Mostly, here, we disappear in cars. Mission Road winds dustily away into the flat amber knife edge of the horizon. The street signs shimmer green lies. Las Vegas, San Diego. The edges here curl inward. The circular logic of time and space. The science lessons we learned in the boxy, trailer, portable classrooms, now demonstrable in how we never leave, but sometimes vanish completely into folded metal of crashed cars, the two objects wanting to occupy the same space, their matter intertwined, the safety glass and plastic pushed into skin and hair. But not Kaylee. She disappears into the mute hollow of a looped phone cord, her neck occupying the void. In class, our teacher shows us how a looped strip of paper, how if we trace it with our fingers, we could follow it forever without breaking contact. This is the shape of the universe, she says, her eyes bright in the slate sky that blazes through the window. Back at that interchange, in the middle of the street, the roots in the tree in Joe's hands trace back towards the sky, twitching, seeking rain in the dead heat of the night, their tiny filament hairs writhing in the breeze. Joe's teeth locked. He tells me that he knew it would be a boy. I'm not so sure. I drive away. In my rearview mirror, he's tearing at the ground again. The lights of a big rig trace a circle around him. His hands at first touching the edges, but then growing smaller, less substantial, as if the light were curving too, folding inward, swallowing him whole. 3. In June, the birds sing all night. The street lamps are broken. The house settles and moans. There's honeysuckle outside, and it froths indoors through the windows. I run my palm flat across the stomach of a girl who never knew these people. Outside, a train is cutting through the night, a finger tracing in the darkness, but never lifting, moving through the silent hulks of buildings in the distance, of empty lots filled with orchard ghosts. It's a song from your car radio, tuned between stations, the snap and hiss shaping into your elegy. Good night, Creley. Good night, factories. Good night, Los Angeles skyline. Good night, rabbits, rustling back and forth in the hush. Good night, ghost lights in your hair. Good night, Joe, your shoulders too big for my arms to fit around. Good night, train. Good night, stars pregnant with darkness and nonsense omens. Good night, clock, winding down, seconds always growing longer. Good night, Mom, shadow traveling up the wall, growing thin. Good night, moon. Good night, owl. Good night. Good night.